Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for this panel this afternoon. I know you all can all agree with me that it's been just an amazing and exciting 2 days here on Pennsylvania Avenue, listening to some of the great energy and environmental experts in the world, not just from the United States, but from around the globe. I found as tired as I am at this moment, listening for 2 days to multiple panels, I'm really encouraged and optimistic given the presentations, at least that I've heard, and I hope you all join with me in thinking about the world gathering to produce more energy, keeping a focus on lowering emissions where we can, building economic hope and opportunity. So I'm really thrilled to be with this great group of panelists today to put a little bit more focus on what the industry and governments and investors could potentially do while producing more energy, all the above for the world, particularly with the US perspective and our allies, but also keeping our focus on reducing emissions in a practical, maybe market driven way. So, competing with an emissions edge. And we couldn't have five more talented and experienced individuals. I'm going to introduce them very briefly, not because they don't deserve it length, but we want to keep as much time as we can for questions, etc. So first, in no particular order, Olivia Azerdijan, who is the Senior Energy Manager for Global Methane Hub, depending on where you're from in the world. Amy Braccio, Chief Executive Officer of Carbon Measures. Sean Gallagher, Woodside International Head of Climate and Sustainability. Claude Letourneau, President and Chief Executive Officer of Savante. And last but not least, Julian Perez, Managing Director of Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. Now, that was very brief for the five of them. They all have extraordinary background, deep experience in this area. So I'm hoping that we can have a very lively discussion. So I'm going to start with just framing this debate for just a minute because this 2 days we've heard a tremendous amount of numbers just swimming in our heads, from the amount of LNG going from 0 to 15 billion cubic feet a day, doubling in a couple of years, predicted by both Cheniere and Venture Global that were here. We heard from folks out of Texas about the 85 kilowatt hours, and don't pay attention to that number. Nobody knows what a kilowatt is, but just remember 85. So we've got numbers swimming in our head. I want to give you all two more that could kind of maybe wake us up this afternoon. You know, the history of the U.S., we've been looking at a lot of historical documentaries, our 250th anniversary this year. So I'll look back 100 years ago to 1926, and the GDP of the United States at the time, with 117 million people, was 90 billion. It was $765 a person. 100 years later, where we sit today on Pennsylvania Avenue, our GDP is 31 trillion. It's $90,000 a person. One of the most extraordinary, and even when you level for inflation, it's a doubling of our population and a 28x growth. Getting back to what Chris Wright said at the beginning of this conference, and he opened it up, energy is life. Energy is economic prosperity. Without it, countries can't grow, civilizations can't grow. So our question for this panel is, keeping these numbers moving in a positive, upright direction, how do we also get the number of emissions to go in the opposite directions so that we can have a positive impact on our planet? What are the best strategies? What have you all been doing? So, this is a historic era of demand for energy. I'm proud to have served in the United States government. I think, for the most part, although our politics can swing left and right, we've been a leader for decades and decades on the energy production necessary to grow our economy, the strongest middle class in the world, and help our allies. But we have a great challenge. We have a great challenge how to continue to do that and lower emissions. So, Julian, I'm going to start with you, Managing Director of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, an industry led, 12 years old, started in 2014 in New York. You started with 12 companies. Now you have 45. Tell us about it. Why was it formed? Why do you think is important? Is it still relevant today?
Thanks a lot, Mary, and thanks a lot as well to the Atlantic Council for bringing together that discussion. I think it's timely because I've just came out from a room where we were discussing about the importance of keeping the climate topic on top of the agenda despite all of the turmoil that we are going through. Because ultimately, while security and affordability will remain like the top priority because they are end of the day or end of the week issue, climate is an end of the decade issue, and so sometimes could be displaced a little bit lower on the priority scale. But it's very, very important that we continue to maintain the momentum because actually the three talk to each other. So yeah, on the OGCI side, what we've done, so you're right, we were launched at the New York Climate Week in 2014. And the idea was to bring together the CEOs of those companies. I think probably if I had to pick up one criteria of success of OGCI is that we continue to have a very strong CEO backup of our initiative. We really bring them together on a quarterly basis, discussing about the strategy and making decisions. And of course, when you involve the CEO of those very large corporate, you move the needle very fast. So I think that has been one of the key success factors to maintain a leadership on climate actions, to continue to have the CEO backing us, but also listening to them. And I think maybe that's the second lessons that I have to take from the existence of OGCI is that having a very humble approach because of course we bring European companies, US companies around the table, but we also bring Aramco, Petrobras, PetroChina, and they all come with different perspective. They all come with different challenges, different regulatory framework, different exposure, different business, and there's not one recipe for all. And we really need to take that into consideration if we want to reduce the emissions ultimately, which is of course, the goal of the climate actions. And maybe the third piece for me has been to try to find a sweet spot among those industry players where climate actions make sense from a business perspective, as well as from greenhouse gas emission perspective, obviously. And I'm gonna just take an example I'm sure Olivia will probably elaborate even more about methane. Or methane, or I'm going to say it in a French way for the third version of the methane topic. Um, so methane, among the oil and gas industry, it's approximately 2 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. It's almost as much as all of the planes and all of the boats around the world. That's as basic as this. So, reducing methane emissions is an absolutely critical path towards the Paris Agreement goals. And so we've started to discuss that point among the companies because it's not only a climate issue, it's also a business issue because ultimately methane is natural gas and so it has a value on the market. And so addressing methane is good for business, it's good for climate, and it's good to match the security, affordability, and climate topic at the same time. So we started to discuss that and trying to identify what can we do together, better understanding, characterizing the issue. And then it's really a theory of change, like defining methodology to calculate it, and then targets, and then technology deployment and policy, and so on and so forth.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We have some technology, we have some strategies. But Olivia, let me get to you. The Methane Hub is not 12 years old. You all are 5 years old. Tell us a little bit about the Methane Hub and maybe give us some examples of some of the companies that have really made some strategic decisions and some investments and some success. Because I think there is a group in the United States, perhaps in other countries, that are not sure that many companies are sincere and serious. But tell us from your perspective what you're seeing and some examples of success.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for having Global Methane Hub here. Just a bit of background on the Global Methane Hub. We're born out of a global leaders pledge that's backed by over 150 governments to get the world to near zero methane emissions. And with a philanthropic vehicle to get that pledge off the ground. Um, we deploy capital for policy, financing, and data, and everything in between, a lot of the coordination as well to get the world to meet that goal. And methane emissions, as Julian mentioned, is good business. It has climate impacts, public health, air quality, and we call methane the emergency brake on climate because methane has 20 times the warming potential of CO2 over a 20-year time period. And really, it's the solution that we have in the next 10 years to really slow global warming. And globally, gas is wasted each year, estimated about 90 billion cubic meters, which is about Germany's entire annual energy demand. So methane abatement and technology really just has true value in tracking molecules as well as the emissions benefits. So to answer your question, the good news is that we can abate methane with existing technology. This is not looking for a magic solution. We have this technology. It's really about the policies and the long-term planning, the financing, and the industry and the companies delivering on the projects. So in order to do that, it's about coordination and enforcement as well as the doing that at scale and doing that together. So Global Methane Hub is backing data. We see that as a really important element to this. So we now have satellite data and monitoring that can track the pollution at the source. And getting that in place is a really big hurdle that we hear from the industry to be able to track, monitor, and measure, and the governments to be able to have visibility of this issue. The second is the markets and the policy, which is really doing the real work that allows the industry for that long-term planning for some of these projects and having that visibility. The EU methane regulation is an example of that, where the effects of that are going well beyond Europe's borders because this is requiring the monitoring, verification, and the visibility of the emissions associated with the production of that energy. And Global Methane Hub is a really big supporter of this policy. We're also seeing Japan and Korea, large LNG importers requiring or asking questions on the data around methane. And then we have some good examples on the producer side of things. Canada has a goal to reduce their methane emissions by 70%. Colombia is now was the first country in the Latin American region to regulate methane. Nigeria has issued methane guidelines. So all of this is really positioning the markets and demonstrating that these clear policies create that market certainty that can allow the investments from the oil and gas community. And then the final thing is financing, which is where there's some quite interesting shifts. There was a lot of hesitancy around investors about greenwashing. Last year we had some guidelines come out. There was a collaboration between the banks, the industry, the financiers, and the NGOs to provide that certainty around what methane financing looks like and what makes a credible investment. So this is really where that collaboration becomes concrete, and we're really sitting at the nexus, helping to coordinate a lot of this and provide the capital to the countries where there are restraints on that.
Excellent. And Claude, I'll get to you about the technology to actually capture methane and your company. You've invented a few things in your life. Tell us about it and tell us about the technology. It's here, it's now. The companies are leaning in, governments are leaning in. This problem is not going away in the minds of companies or governments. What I'd like to say, just one thing before I ask Claude this question, is there's an awakening in the United States, and as a Democrat, I can say this, awakening among Democratic leaders that perhaps you would want to speak to the oil and gas industry, to the energy producers who did so much to help build the infrastructure and the wealth of this nation, to challenge them to continue to do that, but also keep their eye on reducing harmful emissions and trust the engineers, the geologists, the inventors, Claude, like yourself. So, comment about what your company's doing. Tell us a little about that.
Well, thank you for inviting me. You say energy is life. I would say CO2 is life. Without CO2, we wouldn't be able to breathe, and the existence on the planet would be difficult for humans. So, a bit of genesis on the name of the company, Svante. It's named after a scientist, a Nobel Prize 135 years ago. His name is Svante Arrhenius, and he was one of the first scientists to make the correlation between CO2 going up in the atmosphere and the temperature of the surface of Earth increasing. His prediction model is exactly where we are today. So we're trying to fix a problem that was stated 135 years ago. Good. That's the name of Svante. So we're kind of the Tesla of the industry. Now, oil and gas industry, we're one of the first investment OGCI made in the early days, and the only investment they made in carbon capture technology development. So I would say half of my investors are from the energy sector, so the oil and gas industry. So they did recognize, and they do recognize still, the importance of carbon management. So what are we? We are an integrated carbon management company. We basically are physically collecting the CO2 from emitters, industrial emitters, even from the atmosphere if need be. We transport and we store permanently CO2. So we're in the physical market of moving the molecule of CO2. Um, the parallel I can make is waste management industry. Somebody is collecting your rubbish, somebody is transporting your rubbish, and somebody is landfilling your rubbish. We would like it to be recycling the CO2. It is a difficult market to get in because of a price point. But so we've organized the company around a new technology where we took the parallel to the electric vehicle market where you have a battery and the battery is made with solid state as opposed to lead acid that was the incumbent technology, which was a liquid-based system. So we found a way basically of sticking a nanomaterial on a piece of paper, and that paper basically can attract the CO2 and leave the nitrogen out. So, and then when you stack these sheets together, you create a filter. And then if you have a machine that can basically rotate that filter and catch and release the CO2 every minute, you have now a system that is an engineering solution to catching CO2. A machine like us, the size of this room, would be able to catch the equivalent of 10 million trees in terms of its capacity to absorb CO2 and release the CO2 effectively. So that's the technology that we
So we
developed.
could plant 10 million trees, or we could just build a room like this with you, Claude, and we'll do the
Yes.
same thing. Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
So when people say, oh, we have nature base, I do agree, but half of the CO2 we emit in the atmosphere is already taken care by nature. It's the excess that needs to be managed, and that excess is about 20 gigaton, and that's what we're trying to achieve in doing it with an engineering solution that is more effective. So we've organized the company after developing the technology. So we're in the core of our company, an OEM. We're an original equipment manufacturer. We make the filter. We have a filter plant basically in Vancouver that manufacture these filters. We are making the machine, designing the machine, and building capture plant. The second business unit is to be a technology provider and provide this thing as a turnkey facility, working in partnership to build an EPC plant of carbon capture with Samsung Engineering. So Samsung is our partner to deploy worldwide these capture plants. They're worth about $300 million each, so just to give you an idea. So, and then the third business unit now that we have to be in is to be a co-owner and project developer with our emitter partners. So we invest in developing a project, in pre-FID, in financing the plant, in building the monetization of CO2, selling the CDR credit, everything you need to be and even operate these plants. And we do it not only for the capture portion of it, we do for the transport and for the storage aspect of it in some cases, or we rely on a third party like the major oil and gas today in Louisiana who are storing the CO2 for you as a service. So I would say that the approach we have to the market is one where carbon management in our mind will only happen if we create a very compelling business model.
And
If without this, it won't happen. And it needs to be what I call a private and public relationship to do so. The problem of carbon management at the core is a societal problem, and government needs to be involved in that process.
a public-private partnership, and we're going to get to you, Amy. That's what you're sort of developing, and it's exciting with your background in finance and in markets. And some of the largest companies in the world, Exxon, Oxy, Chevron, are all involved with this. They wouldn't be if they didn't think there was money to be made. This is not a charity, this is a business. And people see some real opportunity for business, technology, government, working together with companies. So, Amy, tell us about carbon measures, which is you sort of came out of maybe a prepared retirement to do this. Not that you're that old, Amy, but you got very enthusiastic about this. So tell us why,
Yeah.
as you've had a distinguished career, what entices you about this, and tell us about what you're hoping.
Yeah, so what Mary's alluding to is I retired from EY after 30 years, and I was the global vice chair for sustainability. And my family is very clear that I don't know how to retire. So maybe just setting some context before I jump into what carbon measures is all about. It's been a fascinating few days here. And what's clear both from here as well as from the conversations I've been having around the world with business leaders and policymakers is that very consistently we're seeing that everyone is running three races. And so when we look at it, it's the race for energy, right? And whether it's today's environment or anticipating the additional needs of data centers, we see that continuing. And if you don't have energy, right, you don't have life, but you also don't have the growth and the way of life that we're accustomed to. The next is a race for innovation. And part of that, of course, is tied to the data centers, the compute, the massive change that we're seeing through that. But we also see low carbon solutions and reduction in carbon emissions as a critical component of that innovation as well. And it's exciting to hear about the innovation already just on this stage. And then the last is competitiveness. And around the world, both countries and companies are looking to be competitive. And again, we see that with regulation already taking hold, with buyer sentiments, with the great pledges that have been made to drive down carbon emissions, there's already a carbon dimension to how trade is working. And so when we look at what we're doing at Carbon Measures, it really is how do you innovate the system in a way that allows all of these amazing products to thrive and companies to thrive well into the future. This isn't a room where I need to say this, but I'm sure you all recognize you are making decisions that have to pay off for your businesses for decades to come. And so we know that the world is going to demand, again, more energy as well as reduced carbon emissions over time. So we've got to create the conditions such that those markets can really thrive. And to do that, we look at it in two different ways. So the first is product level carbon intensity standards. We do think that there's a target that organizations need to hit. And we look through that lens because this is something that businesses are very used to doing. The simplest example is we all have seatbelts in our cars, and that's because it's a safety requirement. And so we think it's a very smart, market-focused way to look at policy such that you're driving innovation, you're driving growth, but you're also leveling the playing field such that you're able to reward those that overperform. But you can't have something like that. You can't have that type of competition, market differentiation, if you don't have the data to underpin it. And so you've got to be able to compare a ton of steel from company A to a ton of steel from company B and know what that looks like. And today, there's a lot of great work that is happening with respect to measurement. It's not that people don't know how to do it or aren't doing it. It's that there are a lot of different ways to do it. And so we've got to get to a common approach similar to how we think about financial statements. You know, on your financial statements, you know you're comparing apples to apples when you look at the underpinning numbers. We've got to get to the same place with respect to carbon intensity. And we think if we do those two things, we can really unlock the markets.
Thank you. Look at Sean, one of the largest businesses in the world, oil and gas business out of Australia. Now you've got a big investment, 17 billion in Louisiana. We thank you for it, and our carbon capture and sequestration projects are moving forward. So representing your company, you've got a global view. How are you thinking about methane reductions, the importance of lowering emissions? How is Woodside managing between sort of the European maybe approach versus maybe the US approach? What do you think about Amy's call for common, market certain products? And we've got thousands of products, but I think we're talking about the top 6, 7, or 8 in the world, obviously steel, aluminum, et cetera, et cetera. So tell me what Woodside, and you're the sustainability officer, so I think this is your job, Sean. I hope they're paying you well.
Senator, thank you very much. And appreciation to Atlantic Council for putting on this wonderful event, and it's my privilege to be part of this esteemed panel. And I'm very proud to represent Woodside Energy here today. We're a global energy company. We span Australia, where we're headquartered, the Americas, and Africa. At the core of our business is LNG, and we have delivered over 7,000 LNG cargoes since the very first one was delivered in 1989 to Japan. Here in the US, we're building a diverse portfolio of deep water oil. We're a long-standing present in the Gulf of America, one of the biggest producers. We've got a new ammonia plant just come online in Beaumont, Texas. And of course, we've got our flagship LNG project in Calcasieu Parish, just south of Lake Charles, $17.5 billion investment, the largest ever foreign direct investment in the state of Louisiana's history. And then beyond that, we've got global expansion with a project in Senegal, West Africa. We've got a Deepwater Mexico project due to come online. For Woodside, sustainable business is good business, period. And we focus on delivering the energy the world needs reliably, affordably. We heard Secretary Wright yesterday talk about energy is life. Energy access matters. Energy allows for standards of living to raise, prosperity to raise, economic growth to raise. So our mission at Woodside to deliver energy the world needs matters, but we do it with a relentless focus on emissions performance. We have a hyper focus on methane. We align with global standards. We're signed up to the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. In December, we were awarded a gold standard pathway for our implementation plan. We were a founding signatory of the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter. We're committed to zero routine flaring by 2030. We're reducing our own emissions footprint. In 2025, we delivered a 15% reduction in our net equity scope 1 and 2 emissions. It's at the core of what we do. But to be competitive, to compete, we've got to deliver reliably, we've got to deliver affordably, and we've got to have that relentless focus on methane. We set very, very ambitious low target emissions intensity for methane, including a near zero ambition. We embrace technology, we leverage technology. We have got aerial surveys, we've trialed drones, we've used helicopters, we've got continual monitoring, we've got continuous sensors, we're driving down the detection time, we're lowering costs. We're just trying to work very smartly. And it's not just at the operations level, it's also by making smart choices with our portfolio. As I mentioned, we've got a deep water oil, we've got LNG, we've also got a new emerging product in ammonia. And by leveraging those like across different markets to optimize across different markets. We then can scale up sensibly the lower carbon opportunities over time. But at the end of the day, we're not a charity. We are very disciplined. We are customer led. We are capital disciplined, and we will invest where there's a sound commercial basis. We can't invest on hope that policy will follow. So we look at operations performance, emissions performance, operational efficiency as a source of competitive advantage that allows us to enable us to deliver energy at scale, but also position us for future growth when those markets emerge. So it's a very balanced view that we take.
Well, I think the question is with our last 14 minutes here, and Amy and Claude, I want you all to jump in. Given Woodside's expertise and experience in this and their focus on reducing emissions, given the need for more energy in the world here, Canada, Mexico, North America, the global south, the Mideast, all over the world, India, of course, and China, what are the best mechanisms to incentivize companies, large and small, to lean into a trading regime that sort of makes this automatic and not having to be potentially mandated differently by each government? And I think that's what you guys are working on. So I don't know, Amy, you want to go first, and then Claude, you had some ideas on this, and then you all jump in because I mean, just as a politician, I can tell you, spending all this time in my life in politics, it's much easier if you can come up with a market solution that seems to sort of work for everyone. What I mean by that is people can make money. People want to invest because they can make money. Companies will then put in a little extra capital and time, and the people don't have to pay a fortune for the result. They're happy to have reliable energy that's cleaner, that's helping the planet. How do we make this a reality in our trading system? I think that's what you're working on,
Yeah.
right, Amy?
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we face today is that there isn't an economic incentive for overperformance, right? So organizations will, have made strong commitments, are driving the change for the competitive advantage, but it's not necessarily reflected in the stock price, and it's not necessarily reflected in a green premium at any type of scale. And in my experience with EY and then also in this role, it's progress isn't because of a lack of ambition or a lack of understanding or even a lack of the tools to be able to address it. But at the end of the day, if large corporates keep investing in something that doesn't deliver a return, they can't keep investing. And so the reason why we're so focused on how do you change the market conditions such that you can drive this is that we do think that this combination of smart market-oriented policy looking at carbon intensity alongside with the data that you need to be able to underpin the markets can create an incentive for overperformance so that those companies that are selling into a market and outperforming their competition either have a good way to get that green premium because it actually delivers value to their customer in meeting an intensity standard further down the value chain, or you could create a market and sell, the impact of that overperformance to others that wouldn't otherwise be able to sell in. And we think it's got to be something, that it's got to be based in science. It's got to bring the rigor that we see in financial accounting, the comparability, the auditability. But at the end of the day, if you can do that, then it can also speed up the race because it's providing incentives to those that are winning the competition on this carbon edge.
And what would you add, Claude?
I would add that, if I take the rubbish, the waste management, the cost of collecting our rubbish today is about 1,500 per individual, yes, in North America, and we emit 10 tons so that's about 1,000. It's about $1,500 per ton to manage though. The CO2, if you take 10 tons of emission that we all are responsible with the same budget, it's about $150 per ton. So if we but we cannot smell and see CO2, so there's no sense of urgency of collecting the CO2. If you wait and do nothing, you have extreme weather condition, and basically government have to pay for extreme weather condition in the form of disaster, and that's about $190 per ton of CO2 that they could have spent in avoiding it. So, okay, so the price point is not the issue, is who pays for it. So we're approaching it in a very pragmatic way. We're trying to develop a CO2 marketplace where there's a supply and demand of the physical molecule, but the demand aspect of it can be traded as opposed to physically moving the CO2 molecule from one country to the other. You can do it in the form of credits, yes? So how are we trying to do these things? We're trying to take advantage of the evolving international trade policies that are not the same around the world, yes? Some country may say, I want a carbon intensity on this product. Others say, I don't want to. So uh, Canada and US are sitting on being exporter of energy, and particularly oil and gas and LNG. It sits on a very nice business opportunity because I'm going to give you an example of two industry how we can do a marketplace. The pulp and paper industry in Louisiana has a bit of difficulty because of competition coming from China. They emit CO2 in the atmosphere that nobody cares about because it's coming technically from the atmosphere because it's coming from the tree, and then they burn the biomass and they emit CO2 back. It's 14% CO2 in the flue gas. We go and collect that CO2 and we store it. It becomes a biogenic CO2 that people want to pay for, maybe $200 per ton. We have offtake agreement with Microsoft in that range. Now, we need more than Microsoft to be buy that CDR. Now, the Canada and US are selling LNG. Some country may say, I'd like to have a decarbonized, but to my level of decarbonization of that LNG. Everything is different. Yes? The government in Canada and US can buy the CDR credit from the pulp and paper industry and be able to sell them to countries who are looking to buy the LNG, but at a different carbon intensity that they want. And now suddenly that money was just brokered by the government, but then that will create a market for CO2 that will be at least, I would say, 250 million tons, even more, on our way to 1 gigaton. Yes? That's a simple math, and everybody makes money in the process. Everyone makes money.
Sounds good to me. Jillian?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm very much in alignment with what have been said by Amy and Claude, but just one point if I can compliment Amy, if you allow me to compliment you, because you're the experts. But I think one point that we're observing on our side is that it's very, very important when it comes to when you set up this kind of accounting framework and the way that you're going to tag products against this accounting framework, that you stay technology neutral. Let the market decide what is the best technology to be deployed depending on the market condition in which you're operating. Because in some market, some technology will have a better competitiveness than others because you have the value chain, because you have the business operation, you have the policy landscape, and so on and so forth. But really the nexus, like the backbone of it, is clearly the accounting system that needs to be set up, put in place, and that Amy is working on with many others. So that's really a really game changer that's going to happen. Because as of today, if I was to take an example, I can say my jacket is lower carbon than the one from Claude. Who can prove it? I can
We
claim
can't
that.
prove which one is telling the truth. But if Amy has her way, we will be, yes, we will be able to know. Go ahead. Olivia, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I guess from the methane side of things, investors today can see methane as good practice because well-run assets don't leak. So if you can have the companies competing on the methane quality of those assets and having well-run assets, then you've sort of got a competitive edge. And we're moving towards a world now where that data on methane is being demanded by the consumers and the buyers. So as we move towards that world, it will increase competition to have assets that are well run and not leaking methane.
And what appeals to me about this concept again is, embedding this into an already sort of established global trading system that the countries and businesses are used to. I mean, we're 250 years old in the US, or countries are older than we are. Trade has been going on for thousands of years. If we could figure out this and get the industry not being terminated by certain political factions in the world, like we don't like this industry or that industry, but have all industries leaning into a common goal. Now, that's easier said than done, but I'm extremely encouraged about not just the technology to identify it, capture it, turn it into something that's marketable, that people can make money, and we can have a much more fair trading system that pushes reducing global emissions. We may not get to like the perfect level of no emissions, but we could get much better than we are today for our children and our grandchildren in a smarter way. So I know there's a lot of hot air in politics, but I'm hoping cool heads will prevail and good hearts about trying to figure this out and work together. The U.S. is probably the largest trader in the world, I would imagine that we are. Of course, India is a huge country, China is a huge country, the European Union is huge. But if America could take the lead on this and not be afraid to say, we want an energy system that's both reliable, affordable, and by the way, as low impact to our environment as we can have. So, Sean, does this make sense to you?
It makes a ton of sense, Senator. One of the things maybe could add is we believe the critical role natural gas can play in displacing higher emissions coal when used for power generation. It's potentially a huge win in satisfying energy reliability, energy affordability, and lower emissions outcome for all. You just look at the data published by the National Petroleum Council. You look at the US power generation system between 2005 2019, over 500 million tons of CO2 reduction is directly attributable to the retirement of coal-fired power stations, replacing them by gas-fired power stations. So it's a real deal. And that's a huge part of, if you think about the global LNG system, it's 12% of the global coal consumption on an energy basis. So there's huge opportunity to grow affordable access to energy and reduce emissions in the process. And that's a huge part of our strategy at Woodside to thrive through the energy transition.
Well, one of the companies that presented earlier, and you all heard him, he's one of the most, I think, dynamic leaders in our country, Toby Rice, the CEO of EQT. And he issued a report several years ago unleashing the power of American LNG, cleaning up the basically global emissions. Because if you do not stop, but reduce the coal usage and the methane leaks from coal, that has an immediate impact. And when you think about India and it's poised to lift its population up, we've got to figure out a different fuel for them or a different approach other than just turning on their coal resources. That's a big question, technology, but of course, India has some of the best scientists and engineers in the world, so et cetera, et cetera. But it is exciting to think about this. So we only have a few more minutes. I'm going to let everybody, Amy, starting with you, do a 30-second kind of wrap up. Any comment you want to say that you didn't get to say?
Yeah, one thing I think is vitally important is this is a big systemic issue and it's going to take a lot of different solutions to get there. And so we shouldn't stop ourselves in looking at for the one perfect policy that solves everything. We should look at this as really a lovely quilt or mosaic that can come together to solve this big problem.
Yeah, I think, definitely not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And you just alluded to something that I think is very important, is that we would have a very different conversation if this was happening in Lagos or in Lima or in Jakarta or other places in the world where the priorities are fundamentally different. So engaging the Global South, understanding their constraints, to help them to reduce their emissions, I think it's going to be absolutely critical if we want to succeed collectively.
Yeah, help them reduce emissions and allow them to use their own assets to grow their economy like we did. So we've got to be fair to these developing countries, of course.
I would say, even though in this conference we don't talk about carbon management, I think Mother Nature is going to give us a wake-up call pretty soon. I think at the end of this year, probably this time next year, we'll be talking about the super El Nino that has an impact on the global climate and extreme temperature and disaster that we have to manage associated with this. So once we get these things, I think we're going to hopefully see some rethinking about doing that. So, and second point is I think we need to treat CO2 as a asset as opposed to treating this as a cost to society. And if we start doing this, then we can start developing a marketplace.
Olivia, last word.
Yeah, I guess so. Methane is really the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy bit where we have the technology, and it's about medicating the existing system. So I think it's a good test case for how we can get this right. And then your point on developing countries bringing their energy online, doing that in a way that's collaborative, that we can put today's technology with methane management in place so we learn the lessons from what we've done elsewhere.
Well, thank you all. Will you all join me in thanking our panelists?